Imagine this scenario. You're maybe a parent trying to figure out a new school system for your kid.
Right.
Or maybe you're a small business owner just trying to get a permit. Or heck, even a public servant trying to launch something new. And bam, you hit it. Endless forms, rules that make no sense, different departments that, well, don't seem to communicate at all.
Yeah, that invisible friction. It's so common.
Exactly. We've all been there feeling that wall of red tape. It's frustrating.
It really is.
But what if that wall, isn't just this inevitable bad thing?
Yeah.
What if the system itself, bureaucracy, isn't the villain? What if it's just lost its way?
That's the core question, really.
So today we're asking, can we actually turn it around? Can that whole frustrating process become maybe a force for good? Okay, let's unpack this.
Well, what's really fascinating, I think, is that the problems we all complain about with bureaucracy, they're often not flaws in the original idea, the powerful intent behind it. Our deep dive today, it's really about looking at the difference between the theory, the good intentions, and the reality of how government works on the ground.
Right, the gap.
Exactly. And crucially, how we bridge that gap. We're drawing heavily from Jorrit de Jong's work at Harvard Kennedy School. He spent years helping governments, including right here in Canada, get better, more innovative.
So that's the mission for this deep dive. We want to give you, especially if you're a public servant, a kind of shortcut, a way to understand bureaucracy better, see the real challenges, and most importantly, find practical, research-backed ways to make a difference.
Yeah, tangible ways.
We're talking about making government more efficient, more effective, and genuinely responsive to the people you serve every single day in your communities across Canada. This isn't just theory, right? It's about real-world stuff.
Absolutely. Real application, real impact.
Okay, so let's start right at the beginning. This word, bureaucracy. What exactly is it? Because I think most people just think rules or paperwork.
Yeah, that's the common image, red tape.
But it's way more than that, isn't it? What if, everything you thought you knew was maybe off?
It often is. Jorrit de Jong puts it really clearly. Bureaucracy isn't just a pile of rules. At its heart, it's actually a system of values.
Values. That sounds different.
It does, doesn't it? Think about Max Weber, the sociologist who first really codified this.
Yeah.
He talked about principles like standardization, formalization,
Okay.
expert officialdom, specialization, hierarchy, and accountability. Now, each one of those, in theory, was designed for a really positive purpose.
It's like what? Give me an example.
Okay, take standardization. The idea there is fairness, equity. It means it shouldn't matter who you are or, who you know or what you look like when you apply for a permit or service.
Right, level playing field.
Exactly. Your case gets judged on its merits based on clear, consistent rules. And that's a good thing.
Yeah, different.
And formalization. That was about transparency. Consistency. Everyone knows the process. Everyone can trust it. Expert officialdom decisions made by people who know their stuff.
Competence. Makes sense.
Specialization for efficiency. Deep knowledge. Hierarchy for clear authority.
Yeah.
And accountability to make sure power isn't just arbitrary.
So when you lay it out like that,
Yeah.
it sounds, well, almost logical,
Yeah.
rational, impersonal, responsible, efficient, like a well-oiled machine.
That was the ideal. Absolutely.
So here's the million-dollar question then. If it's based on such good, solid values, why does it so often feel like it fails people? Why the endless forms, the runaround, the red tape, especially when people are trying to get help with really important stuff? Where does that good intention start to, break down?
Well, that's exactly it. It breaks down when the organizations themselves start to violate their own founding values, when they lose touch with why they were set up that way in the first place.
Ah, okay.
That's where the dysfunction creeps in. That thing we all recognize. Like, remember standardization for fairness?
Yeah.
When that becomes rigid and flexible, suddenly it's impossible to deal with genuine, extenuating circumstances for individuals. People feel ignored, like the system doesn't see them.
Right. The computer says no problem.
Exactly. Or formalization, meant for transparency. It morphs into pointless paper pushing. Just forms for the sake of forms. It completely undermines the original goal.
Okay. I saw it.
And maybe the biggest one, accountability. If the structures set up for accountability end up just encouraging people to avoid risk at all costs.
Then nobody takes initiative.
Precisely. It stifles innovation. It stops public servants like you from finding those creative, responsive solutions that communities actually need.
So you get the slowness, the rigidity, the silos between departments.
All those burdens we associate with bureaucracy. But, and this is key, De Jong argues really strongly, we don't need to just throw the whole system out. We don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, as they say.
Okay, so there's hope.
Yes, he gives a really empowering yes to that question. It is possible, he says, to build organizations that keep the benefits, the accountability, the standardization, the specialization, but without those crushing burdens. Well, research they did with the Bloomberg Harvard City Leadership Initiative shows it. Building capabilities like using data better to actually understand community needs, using design thinking to completely rethink how services are delivered to residents, fostering collaboration across those departmental silos.
Right, breaking down the walls.
Exactly. That leads to government organizations that are more nimble, more responsive, and actually genuinely user-friendly. It's about empowering you, the public servant, to serve people better.
That's a crucial distinction because, often the first reaction is just cut the red tape, but that might not fix the real issue.
Right. It's like, as you said earlier, trying to fix a leaky faucet by painting the wall. You're treating a symptom, not the disease.
So if we want to get beyond just symptom fixing, how do we properly diagnose what's really going wrong? Where do we even start?
Yeah, that misdiagnosis problem is huge. So De Jong offers this really useful framework. He talks about 4 distinct levels of analysis. Think of it like a diagnostic toolkit for figuring out public sector problems.
4 levels, okay.
Understanding these is super important for you as a public servant because it helps you aim your efforts where they'll actually make a difference.
Got it.
What's the first level? Level 1, the most visible one usually, is the user experience.
Yeah.
This is where people, residents, feel the friction most directly.
Like that confusing form or the website you can't navigate.
Exactly. Or the endless phone menu trying to get us the answer. It's when the service itself is just designed badly. It's cumbersome, frustrating, maybe even open to waste or abuse because it's so poorly set up.
Okay, so the problem is just bad design.
Fundamentally, yes.
Yes.
At this level. And the solution, user-centered design, thinking about simplifying the language, redesigning the process so it makes sense to a human being, making sure it's actually accessible.
Right.
That the Kafka Brigade work de Jong was involved in, that was all about helping vulnerable people navigate systems that were just overwhelming at this user experience level.
So this is where a lot of the day-to-day frustrations pop up for people interacting with government, and where you, as a public servant on the front lines, often see it first.
Absolutely. It's often the starting point.
Okay, so sometimes the problem is the badly designed form or website. But what if it's deeper than that? What if the form itself is fine, but the rules behind the form are the issue?
Precisely. That takes us to level 2, organizational structure. This goes beyond just the interface. It gets into things like, well, impossible or contradictory regulations.
Contradictory? Like how?
The classic example he gives is a city where, say, the fire department requires a business's door to swing out for safety.
Makes sense.
But the zoning department requires the same door to swing in based on their rules.
Oh, boy. Okay, yeah. You can't fix that with a better form.
Exactly. Or think about funding streams. Maybe there's money specifically for special needs education, right? But it's so restricted you can't use it for, say, transportation to get the child to that education, even if that's the real barrier, and might even save money overall.
Ah, the siloed funding problem. Yeah, I've heard of that.
So the solutions here aren't about user design. They're about changing regulations, redesigning the whole business process, maybe looking at different performance metrics or how accountability works across departments.
This sounds like those tricky interdepartmental conflicts public servants often face when trying to deliver a seamless service.
Very often, yes. It requires looking at the system, not just the touch point.
Okay, so we have user experience, organizational structure. What if the structure's okay, the forms are fine, but things still aren't working? Maybe it's the people.
That brings us to level 3, culture. This is even deeper. This is when the issue is that government officials, maybe they aren't properly equipped or they don't feel authorized, or maybe they're just not motivated to do the work effectively, regardless of the structure or the forms.
So the mindset.
Yeah, it's about people's values, their beliefs, their ingrained behaviors, their sort of professional logic. And organizational culture, as we know, is notoriously hard to change. Plus, public organizations are complex. They're juggling value for different groups. The direct client, the wider community, politicians, taxpayers, sometimes even the courts.
Right. Lots of stakeholders.
Which creates all these inherent tensions and ambiguities. It's not like a simple private company with one bottom line.
So how do you address problems at the cultural level?
It often involves really clarifying the purpose of the work. Why are we here? What are the guiding values? Who are we ultimately serving? What does success actually look like in this complex environment? It means acknowledging those tensions, not pretending government is just a straightforward service provider.
So it's about the internal environment, the ethos, and how that impacts your ability to actually serve people effectively.
Exactly. It shapes everything.
Okay, so user experience, structure, culture. We've peeled back quite a few layers. Is there another level, something even more fundamental?
There is. The deepest level, according to de Jong, is statecraft. Think of it as the art of governance itself.
Statecraft, what does that mean in practice?
It's about choosing the right tools that governments use to get things done. Governments have a whole toolkit, right? Regulation, providing direct services, using financial incentives, communication campaigns, maybe behavioral nudges.
Okay, lots of options.
The problem is, governments don't always pick the right tool for the job. Or they tend to use tools reactively instead of proactively.
Give me an example.
Okay, think about housing inspections. Let's say the goal is safe and healthy housing for residents.
Right.
A common approach is reactive. Wait for someone to complain, then send an inspector.
Standard procedure, yeah.
But that assumes people will call. And often they don't. Maybe they're afraid of retaliation from a landlord. Maybe they're immigrants afraid of dealing with government. Maybe they just don't think it'll make a difference.
Good point.
It also means you're only acting after things have gotten bad. What if, instead, you used data to figure out which buildings are most likely to have problems and proactively inspected those? That's a different statecraft choice.
Ah, proactive versus reactive. Using a different tool data analysis to guide the intervention.
Exactly. And there's a great example from Chelsea, Massachusetts, from that Bloomberg-Harvard initiative. They use machine learning to predict addresses most likely to be at risk.
Okay.
But here's the interesting part. They also found that building inspectors, when they went into these homes, were seeing all sorts of other issues. They weren't trained or authorized to handle mental health problems, substance abuse, domestic issues.
Wow. So they were the city's eyes and ears, but couldn't act on everything they saw.
Right. They were a compliance agency. But what if you empowered them differently? In Chelsea, they started enabling those inspectors to make direct social service referrals, connecting people on the spot to the help they actually needed.
That's brilliant. Connecting the dots.
It created synergy between a compliance agency and assistance agencies. But that kind of thing doesn't happen by accident. It requires strong direction, a deliberate choice about how government intervenes. That's statecraft.
So this level is really about the big picture strategy, how government chooses to operate and intervene to make the biggest positive impact, and how you, as a public servant, can maybe influence those strategic choices for your community.
Precisely. It's about systemic change.
It seems clear that cities, even though they're right there on the ground hearing from people, often struggle to tackle problems across all four of these levels systematically.
That's often true. They might fix a form here, tweak a process there.
But maybe not connect it all up. But you're saying that's changing. There are real examples of transformation we can learn from.
Absolutely. And these examples offer powerful lessons for public servants everywhere, including here in Canada. There are practical tools being used right now.
Like what?
Well, there's the sandwich shop case from Amsterdam. It adapted a method from the economist Hernando de Soto, who famously mapped out every single step it took to legally open a small business in the informal economy. It was incredibly complex.
Wow.
So they adapted this idea for mayors and city leaders, taught them to ask a structured set of diagnostic questions, really systematically. What is the problem we're trying to solve? How do we know what's causing it? How can we start to solve it? What would success even look like? Who needs to be involved, working together? And crucially, at which of those four levels, user experience, structure, culture, statecraft, do we need to intervene?
So a structured way to cut through the complexity.
Exactly. Grounded in what's actually happening.
Yeah,
Just asking the right questions can be revolutionary sometimes.
that makes sense. Any other examples?
Yeah, there's a really powerful story from a small city in Wales.
Yeah.
It involved a woman who was a victim of domestic violence.
Okay.
She was dealing with multiple agencies, welfare, housing, police, mental health, all trying to help, but completely fragmented. She had to tell her traumatic story over and over, navigate different rules, different forms, on top of everything else she was going through.
That sounds exhausting and re-traumatizing.
It was awful.
Yeah.
But then they did something different. They used a technique called journey mapping. They brought representatives from all the agencies together in one room. And crucially, they didn't just review her case file. They invited her to come and share her story, her experience navigating their fragmented system directly with all of them.
Wow, that must have been powerful.
It changed everything. Hearing it directly from her perspective, people suddenly saw where the gaps were, where the silos were causing the most pain, how they could actually coordinate to help people like her much more effectively.
It put a human face on the systemic problem.
Completely. And the postscript is amazing. She was actually hired by the city later to help them improve those very services, bringing her lived experience into the redesign process
That's incredible. It shows the power of really listening to the user
and
experience.
connecting it to the structural and cultural changes needed.
So bringing this all together, what does this mean for you listening right now, maybe working in a Canadian city or for the provincial or federal government trying to make things better?
It means these ideas, these tools, this way of thinking, it's not just academic, it's directly relevant to your work.
Hmm.
De Jong's vision of an ideal world for government is one where you actively take residents seriously, where you tap into their lived experience, not just as anecdotes, but as crucial data, where you conduct that systematic diagnosis, user, structure, culture, statecraft, to see what's really going on.
Finding the waste, the potential.
Exactly. Where are we wasting time, money, human potential? And then how can you, through innovation, actually improve the quality of life for the people in your community? It's fundamentally about empowering you to make those changes happen.
Okay, so let's try to wrap this up. The big takeaway seems to be bureaucracy itself, the idea of it, is built on some really positive, important values: fairness, accountability, expertise.
Right. Good intentions at the core.
The problems, the dysfunction we experience, that's not inherent. It happens when those values get lost or twisted, or when organizations lose sight of their actual purpose.
When the means become the end.
Yeah. But, and this is the hopeful part, there's a clear path to making it better. It starts with correctly diagnosing the problem, understanding if it's at that user level, the structural level, the cultural level, or that deeper statecraft level.
Yes. And connecting this to the bigger picture, the power to actually transform bureaucracy, it really lies within the public service itself, with people like you.
It's about being thoughtful, deliberate in how you diagnose issues.
And being empathetic in how you design solutions. Really understanding the human side of the systems you manage.
Yeah.
And that hopeful answer from De Jong really sticks with me. Can we create organizations that have the benefits of accountability, standardization, and specialization without the burdens of slowness, rigidity, and silos?
And his answer is?
His answer is yes. Absolutely yes.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. Imagine if every interaction you handle, every policy you work on, every program you touch as a public servant. What if you approached it with this kind of diagnostic lens? Not just patching the symptom, but really digging deep to understand the root cause, and then designing solutions with real empathy, real purpose, thinking about those 4 levels. What incredible tangible impact could you then have on the lives of the Canadians you serve?